Okay, we are going to learn Tanya Chapter 14. We're still in the discussion in the way of the Benoni, and this is really the idea of Midas Benoni. So, in other words, even if a person is not inherently a Benoni, this is something that a person can achieve at certain times, whether it's 80% of the day, 10% of the day. We are able to tune into this idea, Midas Benoni, tune into the state of the Benoni for a more limited time. Obviously, something completely accessible and doable for your average Yid, much more accessible than the Benoni itself, but it's on the path to the Benoni, to be quite frank. And this is really what it's about. In a way, it's not about reaching the Benoni. I said in a way. Yes, of course, Benoni is a goal, but for some people it's an unreachable goal. But Midas Benoni, the concept of in every moment in time, whether it's once a day, twice a day, even maybe for some once a week, whatever it may be, this is much more attainable goal. But with in the back of one's mind the idea of constantly growing, please God. So that's what the Alter Rebbe says. Every person can at any time or hour be a Benoni. Because a Benoni does not hate evil. Right? In one's heart, person desires the evil. In one's heart, a person desires the Sitra Achra. But what is his task? To turn away from evil and to do good in actual practice, in thought, speech, and action. And this, one might think, is called a hypocrite. I'll tell you something. I think a hypocrite is overrated. I once heard somebody say, recently, a few months ago, I remember it quite vividly. He said, no, he's not a religious person, not a Jewish guy, but he's not a religious person in his religion because religious people are hypocrites. I said to him, yeah, but isn't everyone a hypocrite? Like why are you pointing at religious people and saying religious people are hypocrites? Everyone's a hypocrite. And if someone's not a hypocrite, I'm surprised. I'm surprised because man is so complex. And maybe deep down we want something, but it just doesn't manifest on the surface. And that seemingly is like a hypocrite. In other words, honestly, the whole concept of hypocrite is overrated. Everyone basically is a hypocrite, to be honest. And one can strive to not be a hypocrite, of course. That one's inside and one's outside are completely aligned. One's thought, speech, and action, all of that is completely aligned. That's not a hypocrite. But to reach this unbelievable level. However, there is a lesson of a hypocrite that we can implement in a holy way of service. And that is right here. That you can feel in your heart, in your blood of flesh. Notice how I said blood of flesh, not the soul. You can feel in your heart, in your blood of flesh, in your animal soul, not your godly soul. In your animal soul, a desire for things of the Sitra Achra, of Klippa, of things opposite holiness. Who says you have to do it? Who says you have to follow that desire? Now modern society says you got to follow your passion and desire. That literally leads to self-suicide, like just about. It's the most retarded thought in the world. It's not a thought, it's a passion. It's a passion that then one's mind explains and substantiates why it's correct. It's complete falsehood. Unless one's passion is for holiness, obviously. But if one's passion is not for holiness, this is the Midas Benoni. That even if one yearns, desires for that negative thought, speech, and action, one doesn't have to do it. That's the whole word. On the contrary, do the exact opposite. Do the holy thing. Do the holy thought, speech, and action. I'll give you an extreme example. I don't want to get into it. I'm just going to touch on it. A person can feel depressed. So who says you have to act depressed? No, but I'm feeling depressed. So, you can still put a smile on your face. You physically can put a smile on your face, can you not? Your answer is yes. Do you not want to is a different story. But can you? Yes. It's part of the cure, by the way, for depression. I don't want to get into it if there's a chemical imbalance. It's a very difficult discussion. But you get the point conceptually. I think the point's quite clear. Right. And then a person can think to himself, I will not be wicked even for a moment, because I will not be parted and separated heaven forbid from the unity of God. And as the pasuk says in Isaiah, your iniquities interpose between you and God. Nothing stops and puts a barrier between us and God except ourselves. Our iniquities, God forbid, our sins, quite simply put, is what separates us from God. Not God, not society, not anything else. Me, you, the individual, his thought, speech, and action is what affects your relationship with God. That's it. A person must think, my real desire is to unite all faculties of myself with God. And this manifests in thought, speech, and action. Dedicating oneself to God, to His Torah, and to His mitzvahs. By virtue of the love that is hidden in my heart. Every Jew has a hidden love, and there's other deeper levels of love that we are able to tune into. But nevertheless, the hidden love is accessible. It's in everybody, we just need to tune into it. And there's the other parts of love. Please excuse me for my yawning. The other parts of love is a discussion for another time. But the concept is the same. So a person will realize even the biggest sin of the Jewish people, God forbid, literally has in the past, as pure evidence, sacrificed their life for God when push comes to shove. So me, you, God forbid, we're not the worst sinners in the Jewish people. Surely we should live for God and live our conscious reality connected to God and connected to God's unity. Fine. Okay. So then Algebra continues. I'm just going to skip the next paragraph. Now, before we were born, we were given an oath. The oath says, be righteous and do not be wicked. I'll ask you a question. If you make an oath, be righteous, doesn't it mean you will not be wicked? And in a way, a second question, but that's based on that question. If you say, do not be wicked, doesn't it mean you'll be righteous? Not necessarily, maybe. But the first question is more clear and more stronger question. So, the answer is, maybe you're not a tzaddik. What does that mean? Maybe you have not had the privilege to be a tzaddik. In other words, a soul is born into the world. They're not born a tzaddik, they're born an average person, so to say. They have to work and grow to become a tzaddik. However, as Alter Rebbe says, that being a tzaddik is a gift from God. So what happens if I try and try to be a tzaddik and I don't become a tzaddik? I can't fulfill the first part of the oath. But that's why the oath has a second part. The oath in effect says, if you're not able or have not been privileged to become a tzaddik, then at least do not be wicked. Okay? This is the partial answer of our difficulty. Right? I mean, it makes sense. It's quite clear. Because the choice of freedom To have holy thought, speech, and action is accessible to every single Jew. Right. And includes the mitzvah of learning Torah. Okay, now the Alter Rebbe continues and said as follows. I said it's a partial answer to the question because it's good enough to say, if I cannot be a tzaddik, so at least do not be wicked. Fine. But then why doesn't the oath say that? Why does the oath say explicitly be a tzaddik? And furthermore, this oath is administered to every single Jew. And majority of the Jewish people are not tzaddikim. Well, there's a pasuk in the Torah which says we are tzaddikim and we are holy, but the Alter Rebbe's definition of a tzaddik is a person who has no desire for evil. Majority of the Jewish people are not those type of people. So how can the Mishnah say explicitly that an oath was administered to be a tzaddik? Don't worry about the do not be wicked. That makes sense now. That be a tzaddik. So, if we cannot be a tzaddik, we have a secondary obligation. So primarily, if we can be a tzaddik, be a tzaddik. But if you cannot be a tzaddik, there's a secondary obligation, which is be like a tzaddik. So then, but why couldn't the Mishnah say be like a tzaddik? Because then what happens if a person has the potential to be a tzaddik? He wouldn't necessarily fulfill that. So the Mishnah has to say be a tzaddik and do not be wicked. We've discussed the second part and that's clear. The first part, our answer is, if you cannot be a tzaddik, be like a tzaddik. That's the secondary goal. And it says be a tzaddik because in order to be like a tzaddik, you have to have your eyes on the tzaddik. You can't have your eyes on a Benoni to be a tzaddik. Your eyes have to be on the tzaddik. Your goal has to be the tzaddik. If your goals are on the Benoni at all times, you will not be able to fulfill the instruction, be a tzaddik. So when it says be a tzaddik, you have to look at a tzaddik, you have to understand what a tzaddik is, you have to appreciate the novelty of a tzaddik, which is not just holy thought, speech, and action, but it's an abhorrent, a hatred, a consummate hatred of evil, a hatred of klippa, a hatred of the concealment of God in this world, which therefore brings about a tremendous, unbelievable love of God. That's the element of a tzaddik, which the Mishnah is telling us achieve that. So, our question is, how can we achieve that? And the answer is, there is a way, to a certain degree. Not to a complete degree, but to a certain degree. And what is that? Is to realize the filth and the dirtiness and the lowliness of klippa. Now, I'm not going to expand on this in this year. At this point, you are welcome to speak to me privately, send me a message and I will expand more. But I'll give you an example. Extreme example, murder. Murder is a disgusting, terrible, inhumane quality. It's despicable. It's a sin. There's many other sins. Not only sins. There's many other things which is klippas noiga. We've discussed it but briefly. There's many other things which is still a concealment of God, even though it's not a heinous sin. It's also despicable to the tzaddik. So if we set about times to contemplate, and appreciate how it is despicable, that will assist ourselves to get an emotion of hatred towards Sitra Achra and Klippa. Not towards physicality, that part of it slightly. Not towards the world, but towards the concealment of God. For your average Yid, eating food is a challenge. Why? Because eating food is the concealment of God. Nevertheless, within that food is a spark of God. A holy spark. It's not that food is evil. It's that for your average Yid, the process of eating food on a weekday is a concealment of God. Now, I'm not expanding on that right now. For your tzaddik, especially a complete tzaddik, eating food in a week, there's a holy experience. Because for him, he's got no desire for the klippa. For him, he's only got a desire for that godly spark within the food. It's quite fascinating and interesting. Tell you briefly, the Alter Rebbe, after he met his Rebbe, the Maggid HaMisrael, this is very briefly, he no longer tasted food. No longer tasted food. What's going on? And they say with COVID you don't taste food. Okay, that's the new way of doing it. That's the modern way of achieving what Alter Rebbe achieved. That's a joke. That's a joke. But the Alter Rebbe was on such a high spiritual level that the taste of food, he was beyond the realm of tasting food. That physical realm, he was just completely beyond. And no doubt, in my mind, the Alter Rebbe had pleasure in saying the bracha on the food, the before bracha and the after bracha, and the process of giving himself physical energy in order to serve God, he got pleasure in, and the process of elevating that godly spark which existed within the food, he got pleasure from. That's all the holiness, the spirituality which exists in the same food that every other Yid eats during the week. But the experience was a completely different experience. Okay, but the point is we are able to tune into this to a certain degree. But this requires a lot of effort. This does not come naturally. Right. And Alter Rebbe explains explicitly that as much as a Benoni can tune into being like a tzaddik, he cannot do that completely and truthfully. It is in a way relatively an illusion. So for him it's avoida. For your Benoni it's an achievement. Don't misunderstand. But also don't be overly proud of yourself, and don't think what you are feeling is what the tzaddik feels. Because the tzaddik feels things which you don't feel. Much more holy and spiritual things than you feel. Even in the heart of your holiness, for the tzaddik, that's like comparably nothing. Okay. But for your Benoni, or even lower than your Benoni, for your average Yid, you are able to fulfill this oath that your soul made before it came down into a body. Be ye righteous. This is how you can fulfill this oath. Right. And then there's another point, is on the discussion of Gilgulim incarnations, which is that through even acting like a tzaddik and doing these holy actions, you are able, again, not your free will, but you making yourself into a kli, into a vessel to receive a soul of a tzaddik coming onto you during your life. That soul of the tzaddik could rest on you for a second, could rest on you for a day or a week, a month, who knows how long. Kabbalah discusses it, and it says that it could be for any moment in time, whether it's a very short moment or a longer period of time. But the point is, the soul of the tzaddik can actually rest on you, and that will obviously assist you in doing your Torah and mitzvahs. It's quite a powerful concept. This is another way to fulfill this oath of being a tzaddik, because you are literally walking around with a soul of a tzaddik sitting on top of you and around you and encompassing in you. So it's quite powerful, quite awesome, like awe-filled. But again, this is not our free will. We can just make ourselves into a vessel to receive this process. And that, chapter 14, teaching us to a little bit to A, be a Benoni, and B, even go beyond the Benoni. Quite a fascinating idea.